moving on, our next speaker is Mika Minio-Paluello, who's an economist with transition economics. I first met Mika when we were standing outside a Unison conference, leafleting to try and drag people to a fringe meeting to talk about how we should be divesting from, our pension funds should be divesting from fossil fuels. I'm glad to say that the following year Unison adopted that policy, and the Strathclyde pension scheme, which is the biggest in Scotland, will be producing a paper talking about how they will adopt such a divestment strategy. Fingers crossed that it will be as good as we hope it will be. We'll wait to see. But very enjoyed working with Mika on that issue for a number of years. Mika, thanks very much for joining us today, and welcome to the conference. And please address the conference.
Thanks, Stephen. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I have fond memories of that fringe meeting. There weren't that many people in the room, but we still managed to achieve the change. It would be great if we can do that across the board, and particularly with some of the, I think, possibly harder challenges of really winning the just transition that we need to see. And apologies that it's a bit dark at this end. The lights aren't working well. So I'm speaking as transition economics. I have various hats at different points. We are a small consultancy that provides economic modelling and consultancy specifically for just and rapid climate transition. A lot of the work looks at how is informed very much by workers at the front line of the climate transition, and looking at, well, how do we actually make it just? How do we achieve that jobs transition we have to see? Because, as we all know, that's crucial both for social justice, but also if we're actually going to, without that, the climate transition itself won't be successful. So Scottish TUC commissioned some work from us back in 2019. The pandemic slowed it down, so it was only launched earlier this year, but as was also informed by the pandemic. And that looked at what are the changes that will be needed within Scotland to meet the existing decarbonisation targets and the kind of direction of travel of decarbonisation. What are the potential job opportunities that are associated with this? And what policies need to be put in place to ensure that relevant jobs are actually created, and that the jobs that are created are decent jobs, so they provide that it's fair work that's created. And I'll drop a link to the final report into the chat in a second. But the headline was that the potential, there's a significant potential for 156,000 jobs, or even as high as 367,000 jobs. So that's a very large number of jobs in a country the size of Scotland. There is large potential there, but it really depends on having the right policies and funding in place, and it also depends on the timeline, because ultimately, let's say, if you think about retrofitting homes, if you retrofit all the homes in Scotland very quickly, there'll be a lot of jobs over a short period of time. If you do it slower, let's say rather than over 4 years, if you did it over 15 years, then it would be still a decent number of jobs that would last for 15 years rather than 4 years. So that's also crucial. But the bad news is that it's, despite those big picture numbers, 156,000, 370,000 jobs, it is also possible for Scotland to decarbonise without significant domestic job creation. And that those jobs that are created could be primarily precarious and could be underpaid. We cannot take for granted that a green job is a good job. That just isn't the case. And once one starts to think about existing green jobs, whether it's people putting insulation in lofts, or folks getting paid by the tree to plant trees, a lot of those jobs currently are not unionized and are often sometimes in small businesses where there's 0-hour contracts or just very no ongoing contract security, limited skills development potential. That we just can't stick with that assumption. They will by default be good. And also in terms of numbers, and I guess we've already heard there from Dave the crucial point on renewables in Scotland. There is massive potential. Our analysis showed that in energy as a whole, you could have up to 95,000 jobs as part of climate transition, of which the vast majority would be in renewables, up to 70,000 jobs. There could be could be. But there could also be less than 9,000 jobs. And even with a very large rollout of offshore wind, that's not, with the odd turbine, as with a massive rollout, you could still have less than 9,000 jobs. And that difference ultimately depends on the policies that are put in place by government. And past experience, present experience, indicates that that the lower figure is unfortunately the more likely outcome. That doesn't mean that we'd end up with the lowest figure, but it's more likely that we'd end up with lower figures. And this isn't only about new jobs, it's also about existing jobs and how existing workplaces are retooled, are refitted to decarbonize. So in one of the breakouts later, I think Kevin from Rolls-Royce from the Inchinnan site just out on the Clyde, just west of Glasgow, will be speaking where there's an ongoing push by workers in the plant to be for a Green New Deal, effectively, to decarbonize production in a way to be building and manufacturing components that are essential for the climate transition. And that's essential if manufacturing jobs are going to continue into the long run within Scotland. There's a significant manufacturing base. And some of those sites, your high profile Grangemouth sites that everybody knows are very symbolic, and others are smaller that people don't know about. We need a plan now, and the investment needs to exist now to be leading that decarbonisation, because the reality is that countries like Germany, like the Netherlands, like Sweden are quite good at putting investment into decarbonising ahead of the game. So in Sweden, they've already produced this last month steel, blast furnace steel, historically relies on coal, produced with hydrogen, with zero carbon hydrogen. And Scotland needs to be ahead of the game. And so, for example, that means thinking about what to do about Grangemouth. It means thinking about what to do about refining, what to do about chemicals. Then there aren't easy answers. Sure, there's a whiskey residue mini refinery being set up, also in Grangemouth, actually, by Celtic Renewables. That's great, but that won't be able to expand to the full scale. Larger scale, we need to see, well, how do we produce those resources that will still be needed 20 years down the line? Some plastic will still be needed. Use plastic in wind turbines, use plastic in a lot of in buses. There's some things that are required for the climate transition itself. We need steel for the climate transition. How do we ensure that we shift refining and chemicals to be zero carbon? How do we do it? Start putting that investment in now so that those jobs and that manufacturing base continue to exist in Scotland rather than shutting down and moving elsewhere. And preferably making sure that actually there's remanufacture. So there is that there is an expansion, that there's a growth, and there's potential for that if that investment takes place now. The buildings, also crucial. Retrofitting homes, STUC and others are running campaigns on making sure that we're pushing for councils to run street by street retrofitting, insulating homes. There's also a need to build new homes, new social homes, for those to be zero carbon homes, introducing district heating, fast broadband. All of that requires public investment as well as planning levels of municipal and national energy companies. And land use also provides, and Scotland obviously has very large potential there, whether it's in terms of expanding organic farming, shifting towards organic farming, which involves more jobs in rural, also expanding forests, reducing deer population, restoring peatlands. All those ultimately can lead to improved quality of life and can lead to significant job creation. But there's a crucial question to build in on, how do we make sure those jobs right now are decent jobs? And ultimately it comes back in large part to questions of investment. So in the report, I'll stick the link in, there's recommendations on, well, Scotland needs to find a way to put 2.5 billion-ish, give or take, into ports and manufacturing. Needs to be a Scottish national energy company. We need to see several billion invested into proactively decarbonising manufacturing. Some of that can be private investment, but we really need to see the state leading on the way. Large amounts need to go into expanding forest cover. And at the moment, what we see is obviously a lack of investment. And sure, Scotland is doing better. mostly than the rest of the UK. But the UK as a whole is lagging terribly behind, despite all the rhetoric of climate leadership, even amongst its G7 peers. Some analysis done by the TUC earlier this year showed that if you look at the per year amount per person, the UK is putting £18. So it's for each of you on the call who's sitting in the UK, £18 is being spent by the UK government on the climate transition in total, everything. That's cycleways, that's decarbonising industry, that's renewables, £18 per person. In Italy, the plan is over the next decade. In Italy, the plan is £140 per person. In the US, Biden was planning £300 per person. That doesn't mean that those figures are enough, but it shows just how far behind we're lagging. And if we don't shift that, rapidly scale that up, then ultimately, coming back to the beginning, we're stuck with the likely outcome of creating far fewer jobs than we actually need to see, than we want to see, or than we could see. And that's why, as climate activists and social justice activists, it's absolutely essential to go bringing those two questions together, is where we need without the investment in place, we won't hit the climate targets and we won't create the jobs. I've gone a bit over time, so I'll stop there.